Hello and welcome to the first video of this channel. In this video, we're going to go over um, tracking API data through Segment. Um, if you're not familiar with Segment, it's a custom data platform that allows you to track events from your platform. The cool thing about this is not like just Google Analytics. You can actually connect it to many sources and distribute it to many destinations. For example, a web JavaScript application can go to a Google Analytics account and then a Marketo or Twilio destination to some advertising destination. And that's all done through some of their implementation. So they really streamlined the way you can send data to multiple destinations. The cool thing about it, most of their destinations are cloud mode, which means you implement Segment and one piece of code will send events to all your destinations, which is cool. So we're going to be going over how to track data through a Python API. We'll set up a quick fast API and then load the necessary libraries. But if you guys want to check it out, you can create a free account. I already have one. So we're going to be reviewing this. Okay, cool. So this is their dashboard. And here you have your home page where it tells you what's going on. You can check out connections. So your sources to your destinations. You can check out privacy, and then these two are paid features. So we're just going to be checking out a simple Python API, right? Now, if we wanted to add a source, we can click on Python and actually check out their documentation. So here they help you understand sending data to Segment and any other destination. All right, so cool. So in our case, we added a source. We're going to click Python, and then we're going to add a source, right? Okay, sweet. So we're going to call it this. We're going to send it to one Postgres destination or warehouse. Cool. So now we get a write key. So what we're going to do is we're going to pip install this library, Segment Analytics Python. And actually, I need to open a command prompt. All right, so then we just paste this in here. It should install the libraries for us. All right, sweet. Now I'm gonna install the Fast API just to create a quick, simple API. And actually, let's get an example from their website. Installation. I do need to install this as well. What Uvicorn is what starts the app in an asynchronous mode. Sweet, so awesome. So now this should just work. If we run, actually, I think we have to do Uvicorn. What is main app? Do a reload. Okay, so just like that, our app is running. I can't copy this. Okay. Well, our app is running here, right? Okay. So now, going back to the segment quick start, we're going to import the analytics library and then set a write key right after. So I'm going to copy this. Boom. Then this write key we just copy from here. Paste it. And just like that, should be set up. All right, so step 3, identifying users, right? So if we had an endpoint that was just users, user ID, so then we're going to have a couple users. We're going to do ID, we'll do 1, and then we're going to do a name, Jake Sparrow. Sweet. So then we're going to just add another one. 2, this is going to be James Fitz. I don't know if that's the last name, but okay, so we have 2 users. So this should be user ID. I believe this needs another space. We're not going to need a query string. Okay. So and I'm just doing this super quick. Isn't there a way to look? Actually, let's call it U for U in users. FU ID equals to user ID. Now we're gonna got the first one. And we're going to call this user. Okay, so now let's see if this works. We're going to go to users 1. Okay, so we got our user back. All right, so we have an API working. So let's say a user is trying to make a request. We can maybe do it so here. We'll have this. Actually, let me make this a global variable. I think this should work. All right, so we have our users here. Okay, great. Q, so it's our query string, which we can actually call it user ID. Now we're going to grab the same user. Now we're going to pretend like this user made that request, right? So all right, so we can go to item as well. Items 1 for item ID. Okay, that can be fixed. User ID. Then we have a user. So now successfully. Okay, user ID is null. So that's perfect. So now we send a user ID. That is weird. But users work. Okay. This is need to be int, I think. Maybe that's it. Okay, sweet. So now it works. All right. So back to segment. Let's say this user requested this item, right? So as of now, we go back here. We have a debugger, which any event that flows through our API is going to show up here. So now what we're going to do is identify user when they ask for that item. What this will do, it'll create a profile within segment for that user that will live on forever. Okay, so we're just going to copy this. The identify method is how you tell segment who the current user is. It includes a unique user ID and any optional traits you need to know about them. So that's key, right? Any optional traits you want to know about them. So let's say not only do they have a name, but they also have an email. We're going to call it jake.s@pirates.com. Whereas my man here is going to be james.f@example.com. I can't come up with anything else better. Okay, sweet. So now we have email. All right, so now if we find a user, right, we're going to call the analytics identify. Now the first argument is a user ID, which I think it has to be a string, but we'll see. So name, I'm going to switch this for user. That get name, email, user that get email. And then here, what we're going to do from datetime, every time, import datetime. Okay, so then I think we're going to need one of these. So now, if I send a request with the user ID, we're going to start creating a user profile for this user. Now this created at, you would normally have this in a sign up event. I don't think you want it here, but I'm just going to leave it here for reference so it sends the first time. All right, debugger, still nothing. So now this should not trigger that. If we look at here, there's still no data flowing. And this is a live view, so as soon as I get the event, it'll show up here. All right, so no user ID. Now, as soon as I do this, it should send an identify call with this user. Actually, we're going to do user ID or user requesting item. Then we're going to print sending identify event for user it's done, identify call sent. Sweet. So now if I send this, all right, no server errors, so that's good. Means that worked. User requested an item, sending identify event for the user with ID Jake S at pirates.com. Identify call sent. Now we can come back to segment, and here in the debugger, we have one identify event, which is great, right? Email. What? Oh, Jesus. Okay. So now if we do it again, just to show you something real quick. Actually, no. We'll leave it up for a different time. Now if I send this again, all right, so we get the same thing. Jake Sparrow, but now we get the email. That was just a mistype on my end, but here we go. Okay, so now this is the identify event. This will start creating user profiles for you users. But there's the interesting part, which is track actions. This would, for example, happen when you purchase something, when a user creates an account, and when a user signs in. Any valuable action on your website that gives you value. Signed up is a big one. Basically tells you when you get new users, so that's new revenue. Article bookmarked, you can start seeing their like links. Eventually, possibly create a recommendation system based on their likings and things like that. So, okay, sweet. So this ends here. So let's send a track event, right? So back to this user. Let's say after this, print user viewed an item, right? So this is going to be our track event. A user viewed an item. So for here, user, we're going to do the user ID, then the article name. So item viewed, and you can name these anything you want. Segment has a specific format they want. They want like action and then the past sense. Is that right? Noun, verb, basically. So something that happened. An item was viewed. A user signed up, right? Okay, so an item got viewed. So let's create an items array now. We're going to call this beach ball. I don't know why. And then something like skew. I don't know if I'm spelling it right. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, D. Now 2. We're going to call this beach towel. And then there's Q. 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know if I did that right, but anyway. Okay, so now we have 2 items. So now a user here viewed an item. So now what we're going to do here, right before this, we're going to do what item they're looking at. All right, so what we did here, same thing with it as the users for pick the item from one of the item and the items array. If the item ID is is equal to the item ID they're requesting. And it somehow doesn't recognize items, but it's right there. I'm sure to pick it up once I do. Oh, never mind. Here we go. Okay. So now we have an item. So now here, as part of our item viewed event, we probably want to know what item this is, so we can call something like item ID. And then we're going to do item.get. So from the item object, we're getting the ID. Item name, we'll call it. And this can be item.get name. And finally, we'll probably want to do their SKU as well, right? I don't know why I just did that, but item.get SKU. So then what we're going to do here, we're going to print when the event is about to send. So sending track event. And then right at the end, we're going to do print track sent. Okay, sweet. So now if we go back here, we're looking for item 1. And user 2 is going to make this request. So now if we go back to the code, so the user requested an item, sending an identify event for users with this identify call sent. So then they viewed the item, sending the track event, and then track sent. Very well. So we get our identify call, jamesfexample.com, and then our item viewed, which we get our item ID as 1, item name, pitch balls, SKU. Then if we look at the raw, it's connected to our user ID. So that's the power of the identify calls. It first creates a profile for your user, and then when you tie it with track events, every track event with the user ID will get tied to that user profile. So now this is something cool. This is a paid feature, but something with personas. You can actually don't have it connected, so I can't even show you. But this is what a user profile looks like. And I can show you because this is all demo data. None of this is real. But here you can see their identify events. You can see their users' IDs, anonymous IDs. We're going to talk about that next. We get their emails. They're part of any audiences, journeys, events. Nothing on the last 14 days. Okay, sweet. So now going back to our Python test source. Anonymous ID. So that is great, right? Now, when we don't specify user ID currently on our items endpoint, nothing happens. We've implemented logic only if a user is requesting this. So what we're going to do, this normally wouldn't be, you normally want to clean up this logic, but just for demo purposes, we're going to do it this way. Okay, so if a user ID, this logic is going to run. Otherwise, meaning no authenticated user is viewing an item. An anonymous ID in Segment is pretty much a session ID where you can create an anonymous ID, and you would want to use that anonymous ID as part of their session ID, basically. So since we don't have a user ID for that user, it's not authenticated. We don't know who it is yet. This anonymous ID is going to be a way to identify them throughout a process until they get authenticated, if they ever do. But basically, every event will get tied to that anonymous ID. So it kind of works like the user ID, where it creates your profile with this anonymous ID, and the events are tied to that user using that anonymous ID. Cool. So, if we don't have this, what we're going to do is we're going to import UUID. UUID should be like a UUID format, basically. Or normally. I don't remember if it's a requirement like that or not. But cool. So then we know exactly actually, let me do this. I don't want to do this else. It does not look right. All right, great. So now this logic is going to run only if the user is not authenticated now. So we're going to do an anonymous ID. Jesus. That UID 4. Sweet. And we're going to do string version of it. We have our item. Now we don't want to do an identify call for anonymous people. If you don't know who they are, don't even create a profile for them. That's what the anonymous ID is for. Every user, as every track event gets tied to that user. So now, since we already have the item, we already have our anonymous ID, what we're going to do now is just send a track event that an item was viewed by an anonymous person. The way to do that, I'll show you. And no, you don't replace the user ID with anonymous ID. There's a special way to do it. So, no user found. We're going to print that. Sending data as anonymous user. So analytics, that track. Now the first item is user ID, but we don't have one yet. The user's not authenticated, so we're going to do none. Then we're going to do the name of it. So we're going to call it item viewed. And then we're going to add the properties, right? Which I can just copy from here. I don't need you guys to hear that over the mic again. Okay, great. So now we have our track event. Now we haven't used the anonymous ID yet. That is because I think there is. Yep, so here's a reference. So we got all our stuff, and we can actually do this. So, and then if you don't want to send any info, you can just send that. But what we're looking for is a context object, which is this. Oh, actually, this is so much better. So in .NET, you need a context, or no, you need an options object. Yeah, so sweet. We don't need to do that. So now all we have to do is right at the end, let's do anonymous ID equals anonymous ID. And this is the name of the argument. So I'm just doing it. Or actually, after this, I just need to return. We're going to return the item ID, which is the same item ID as above. And since we're returning the user ID here, we're going to return the anonymous ID. And you normally don't want to do this with an API. I'm just doing it for demo purposes, right? You normally don't want to make public your session data. So, very well. And at the end, we're going to do print data sent as anonymous with anonymous ID. Anonymous ID. Okay. Oh, wait, what the heck? All right, great. So if the logic there is right, hopefully nothing breaks. Just item. Oh, sweet, dude. So this worked all right. So we have the item ID 1, anonymous ID. So this is actually our anonymous ID generated. And check this out. So the first one had a user ID. Now this last one, there's no user ID, but there is an anonymous ID, which is something this one doesn't have. And I think as I found out, I think it's something that you do want to keep at all times, a session ID for a specific user. It just helps tie a lot of the data from before they were authenticated. Especially Segment, you would want to implement it in your UI as well, especially your JavaScript, possibly. And the reason why they do server-side events is because the way data legislation is going, where it's so much easier to add ad blockers to your browser or like iOS 14 and beyond. Apps ask you basically if you want to get tracked, and I feel like a lot of people are saying no. So that's where server-side events come in play really nice. None of these ad blockers can touch it. iOS 14 can't touch it. It all goes through your server. So whatever data you send is the data that Segment will get without ad blockers intervention. But that's been all. I'll extend on this. We'll look at how to connect a destination to your source and see that data, something like Google Analytics or some dashboard application or even our warehouse. But cool. I'll see you guys the next time.